Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Are we ready to begin?
Yes, we are.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Today is the third Sunday in Advent, often referred to as Gaudete, which means joy from the Latin. And on the, isn't that right?
Sure, yeah, that sounds great.
Good. And are you going to be lighting a rose candle
Today, yes.
Good, you're liturgically correct.
Good.
And what does the joy of today at 11 o'clock signify to you?
What does it signify to you?
What does it mean to you today, especially today?
Especially today, the children giving a pageant in the midst of a season of loss for many, including for some in this room, myself included. So that's the joy that I'm lighting today.
Good.
Was there a right answer? Because
That's the right answer.
Okay, good.
That's right.
Get a star.
I always remember as in my pastoral days, the year that we had two Marys because we couldn't come up with one Mary, and my own daughter's always just saying, "Why, I should be Mary." You're the minister. Why can't I be Mary? Is that right? So.
Yeah.
The gospel from John, which Larry will be preaching about this morning, let me just read the opening words. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. He said, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, make straight the way of the Lord," as the prophet Isaiah said. I'm always mindful at Advent that we walk a path between the lighting of the candles, which signify hope, peace, joy, and love. We also walk a path through harder Christmas awakenings, as Patrick alluded to, through a wilderness strewn with sorrow and loss and uncertainty and fear. But today we hold to John's promise of light coming into the world. And in that light, we find joy. So let us pray. Merciful God, who sent your messenger John to prepare the way of the Lord, give us grace to hear his warning and forsake our trespasses, that we might greet with joy the coming of Jesus Christ, our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Ellen, you came back. Good. Today we continue our theme is trailblazers. And so it's appropriate. We're kind of following the path of William Gregory, a Scottish immigrant, a trailblazer here to Alexandria. And so we honor those who blaze these trails before us, and we seek to understand how their paths have shaped us, certainly shaped you, and guided our own faith path as individuals and as a community. Welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Okay. Will I do it again like I did last week where I kind of roam around? Is that good? Because I don't have we're just going to go low tech. Hi, everyone. My name is Ellen Hamilton. And as I said before, I am the granddaughter of Westminster's first ordained minister, Clifford Johnson. Last week, I told you about how I found myself writing the most exciting story of my life. We talked about how I found my subject, William Gregory, in the Alexandria Times newspaper. He migrated to right here to Alexandria in 1807 at the age of 18. Today we'll find out about what Alexandria was like when William arrived. William left Scotland on March 21st on a wooden sailing ship. That was how you traveled back then in the 1800s. He was propelled by the wind only. So this was a very uncertain way to travel because you never knew how much the wind was going to blow. Your travel time could vary between 6 weeks at sea, 5 or 6 weeks, up to 11 weeks at sea. So you have a ship full of mothers and babies and William and guys and rats and all kinds of things. And how are you going to plan the food for that? So this was really a problem. I mean, 6 weeks of food for 200 or 300 people is really different than 11 weeks of food. So a lot of things went awry on these trips. People died. Sometimes it was pretty dreadful. And one thing was everybody arrived on their last leg and with no money, penniless. They'd given all their money to the ship's company to get them there. So many Scots arrived in America penniless. That's how, of course, the St. Andrew's Society was started, not to have nice dinners, but to have a collection of funds to give to the incoming Scots, fellow Scots. You were a Scot, more Scots were coming, to help them get on their feet. So that was St. Andrew's Society. I always thought when I started this that William would get on a ship and arrive in Alexandria, or I thought he might come up to Chesapeake Bay. That was one of my questions getting started. Well, I found out this was not the case, even though there were many ports in Virginia, some that are not here anymore, but there are many ships ports. But in my reading, the people always came to New York, which, that's why New York is New York now, because everyone came there. I mean, none of his brothers and family members who came later, everyone went through New York. So he left Scotland in March 21st, first thing in the morning, right when the wind blew. They were waiting, as I said, and it didn't start blowing till the middle of the night, 1 a.m., as he writes to his father, that letter I have in the book. But he did not arrive in New York City until May. So he gets in New York in May. And Thomas Jefferson was the president. And there was, at that time, a trade embargo with Europe because of the Napoleonic Wars between England and France. The trade embargo was devastating for America. I mean, business was really bad. Nothing was happening. And William was here. He was staying with a friend of his father's, helping out in his shop. And he helped out in another fellow Scots shop for a while. Business was pretty bad. And after a while, he didn't have any more work. He said, I went up and down the street in New York. At that time, 1807, New York City, what was it like? Just the bottom tip of New York was New York. That was it. Maybe it went up to not even Greenwich Village at the time. So he looked and looked for a job and was speaking to people. And finally, by asking around, he heard about a fellow Scot named Robert McCrae, who had a dry goods store in Alexandria, Virginia. So dry goods. Some people will tell you in this town that dry goods means what is dry goods?
Everything.
Well, some people will tell you it's like noodles.
No.
There's a shop in Old Town. Oh, we have dry goods. And there's beans and noodles and no, that's not dry goods. It's not noodles. Dry goods means fabrics,
Right.
and cording, lace, corduroy, I don't know, whatever fabric they had, and carpets. Carpeting, which was made in Kilmarnock, Scotland. So let's see. So William found Robert McCrae down here, and so he decided to come here. How did he get here? Well, he traveled by horse-drawn carriage. How long did that take? It took a week. It took about a week. And he didn't just stay in the carriage for 7 days. No. You got to Philadelphia. You would get out. Maybe he knew somebody, some Scottish friends of his dad's. I don't know. His father, by the way, had lived here in the 1760s. His father had been here. So his father was sending William back to a place where he had lived for 10 years as a young man. That's all in the book. Anyway, so he would stop off in Philadelphia, in Baltimore, take a break, do whatever you did. And then he got to Washington. So he came down. He didn't come down the Beltway and down through Virginia. No, he came down into Washington, D.C., which was probably real teeny. And then how do you get across the river? There was no bridge here at the time. The first bridge, the Long Bridge, was built the next year in 1808. So William got to see the building of the Long Bridge. I love that. No, he took a ferry across from Washington. That's how you got to Alexandria. You took a ferry from Washington across to Alexandria's dock, which was at the foot of Orinoco Street at the time. So you got onto that ferry with the horse and the wagon and everything. The whole horse and wagon, everything got on the ferry and would come across. And that ferry was a regular thing. It went across that river. You know, you have a regular ferry over time. Okay, let's see. So at the time, well, Alexandria was a very small street grid. And William wrote home to his parents in Kilmarnock about Alexandria. Alexandria is a very large town, very regular laid out. And what he means by regular laid out is we had a square street grid. And so I grew up in Germany. I got to go to German school, all in German. And one interesting thing I never forgot was we were taught how the difference between Americans' town layouts and Europeans was people came to America and laid out a grid, whereas European towns had been evolving from the cow paths over many years. So your old town and any of European town will be more concentric. So you'll have, it's kind of like Arlington, really. You know, you have, or, you know, Rolling Road, or where the tobacco got rolled in here. We have one diagonal street here too. But so the European towns, generally the old town will be, so he came in, wow, it's a grid. It looks different. It looks different than Kilmarnock. William continues, he says, it contains about 8,000 inhabitants, 3,000 of them Negroes. I have got a very good situation, I believe, among well-doing people. So William worked for Mr. McCrae at his dry goods store, and Mr. McCrae put William up in a rooming house called Gadsby's Tavern and Hotel. William lived there. So in addition to his housing at Gadsby's, William was paid about $100 to $200 per year, which was good. He wrote home, this is great. You know, I have some extra money. I could buy nice clothes. That included bed, board, that's the food part, and laundry. His housing, that's what his housing included. Mr. McCrae, William noticed with interest that Mr. McCrae liked to have his friends over on Sunday to play cards. William was shocked. He wrote home to his parents, and I have his letters, by the way. This is his own writing that I got. I'll tell you later. He wrote, the natives of this country, and by natives he means Europeans, right, are irreligious. They play cards on Sunday. They gamble at the races. When yellow fever ravaged Alexandria, William came down with it. Alexandria was a hotbed for diseases. At times we were ravaged with disease at times, just everyone got sick. A lot of people died. They had to set up quarantines down, can't remember the name of it, but down the tip of Alexandria there. But anyway, he came down with it and he was quarantined in the second room ballroom at Gadsby's, which we might know, that room. I think that room was actually 2 rooms back in the day. Today they've opened it up. It used to have a wall down the middle of that. Anyway, William went to church. He attended the Presbyterian meeting house. And the minister at that time was James Muir. Reverend Muir came from Ayrshire, Scotland, just like William. So you were surrounded by other Scots. At one point, his father said, oh, your sister wants to marry somebody named Rankin, but he's got relatives over where you are. Go find out about his character. Go up, and he goes, okay, I'll go down the street. I'll go find out. So you can find out about, you know, people from home over here and right back. Oh yeah, he's fine. His sister married a Rankin. Turns out one of my neighbors' name was Rankin, so I don't know. All right, so later on, William must have had a disagreement with the meeting house because he helped to build Second Presbyterian Church in Old Town. Some of my sources one of them, thinks there may have been a disagreement over William's, later on, his ownership of enslaved people. So that, I don't know. Someone thinks that. So back in Scotland, William's father was a partner in this carpet factory. A weaving, factory with a lot of people who were making, using looms. So we have pictures of people at the loom. The factory employed many weavers. And once the trade embargo of the early 1800s was lifted, from the President Thomas Jefferson's years, Mr. Gregory, William's dad, wrote to William about exporting Kilmarnock's carpets. So you see, he was thinking, get my kid over there, then that's a market. We're gonna sell our carpets to Alexandria. So over the years, many carpets and fabrics were sent to Alexandria to Mr. McCrae's shop. Now they came through New York City to get to them, to get the carpets. They had to go all the way up to New York every time. So throughout his entire life, someone from the shop here was always going up to New York City to monitor incoming goods. So I didn't delve more into that, but they didn't come here. You always had to go up to New York to get them. And these fabrics would come in enormous bolts. They would like tie them together. And they would say, you can slip in some things. Oh, slip in some nice something in between the layers of carpeting. You could, because it's a huge thing. So that's how I imagine. There's a word for that, but I can't remember it. That's it. So the War of 1812 actually hit Alexandria in 1814. So young men here between the age of 18 and 40 would volunteer. They had to make their own blue outfit, Alexandria Blues. That was the name of our militia. It was always a local militia. So William joined the local Alexandria militia. They would train just up there on North Washington Street at the Catalpa lot, right across from William's, later his house. So he served in the militia. And during the war, he and his men were stationed on a high bluff overlooking the Potomac River, south of Alexandria, at a place called White House Landing. You'll read stories and some people get confused and they think that's the White House. That is not the White House. That is White House Landing, which is today called Fort Belvoir. And William and the troops and the men, I have a picture of them. This is the only picture I know of, an actual shot of where they were, which is, it's just fascinating. But they watched as the world's most powerful navy, Great Britain, sailed up the Potomac River. What a sight. I've read that it was a sea of billowing sails just coming up the Potomac to come and get us. I mean, it must have been powerful. Then they watched that they came up in August of 1814. And he and the others watched as later on they sailed back again with 21 of Alexandria's ships filled with our flour, tobacco, and cotton. As the ships were passing William's position on the hill, the wind stopped blowing and they came to a stop, and vicious bombing ensued. The same bombs that are in the rocket's red glare, those are the same type of bombs. They made this enormous amount of noise and flares and everything. That's where that description comes from. But so the bombing ensued for several days because they were stuck. And then finally, wind kicked up again and the ships could continue on. And that was the end of that. Thank God for the wind. So after about 15 years, William's like 33 years old. And his family back home are beginning to wonder, is he ever going to get married? Finally, in 1822, William married Margaret Bartleman. Her father was a prominent Alexandria businessman, William Bartleman. He's buried just south of Alexandria. And William's brother, Alexander. So there were like, I don't know, 9 or 10, Gregory kids who kept coming after William left. But his brother Alexander was living here at the time. His dad sent more kids over. And so Alexander wrote back to the story, and we have all these letters. I got to read a lot of them if I could decipher them. He writes, "You may rest assured that William has got a good wife, as everyone agrees who have known her She comes from a respectable and sober Presbyterian family. So William and Margaret lived with her parents at first at 207 King Street. So probably in the third floor bedrooms of the house. Today, that building is the Sonoma Cellar Restaurants, right there in the second block of King. So in about 1828, William bought his first properties with a partner at 400 and 402 King Street, across from Alexandria's City Hall's catty corner from City Hall. It's right where the Alexandrian Hotel is. There's a big, enormous brick. The whole block is a brick edifice. And those were his first two buildings. These are his buildings in the 1960s. This photograph was taken by the city in order to document the whole block before they demolished it. It was torn down to make way for, as I said, Alexandrian Hotel. In 1831, William bought 329 North Washington Street. It was known as the Ledbetter House because the Ledbetters had been renting it. And notice how I pronounce Ledbetter. So everyone here thinks it's the Leadbeater Apothecary. And that's his family. That's the same people. One of his, let's see, one of his daughters married a Ledbetter. William's descendants, who I have contact with, they help me out with this, say, no, it's not Leadbeater, it's Ledbetter. So we all have to change. Alexandria has to change its, and believe it too. You know, some people say, oh, no, actually it's Ledbetter. Let's see now. So he bought the house that the Ledbetters had rented for $4,000. And William now had experience with building, so he added 2 floors to the house. And he needed that space to house 9 children from 2 wives at this point. And there were several slaves. He had bought 5 enslaved people from George Washington Parke Custis, which I talk about in the book, but I'm not going to talk about that today. In the side yard, William planted 1 tree for each of his kids, and there was a brick firing kiln in the backyard. And the children played with bricks that they found that were left there. And when I did my research, I was like, where did all these bricks come from? All of Alexandria is a brick town. I was looking and searching, and where was this great brick factory? It must be here somewhere. I was scouring the map and scouring everything, and I found out, oh, it's in the backyard. They made their own bricks. They just made them in their backyard. Amazing. So now you may know this building at 515 North Washington Street. This building was built to be a cotton factory, modeled after the same large cotton factories William had known back in Scotland. They had been being built in the late 17s, so William left in 1807. So they were there. He knew, that 27, big cotton factories built in Renfrewshire in a very short amount of time. So and they're all around there. Even if you go today, there are some remnants of them still. Most of them people live in. They turn them into condos. Everything in Britain gets turned into a condo. Anyway, so William and 8 other men planned and financed this building. William actually was the head of a bank at some point, so he was kind of a bigwig in town. He was a business owner. He was a leader of a bank, which is no longer. But so he probably had to do with the financing of this. And this operated as a cotton processing factory for about only 20 years. And next up, we have William. Oh, we're supposed to have William. Did we miss one? Well, anyway, never mind. You're not going to see William. You have to see him in the book. It's in there. All right. So this is the grave site. So William died in 1875. And his memorial service was at the Presbyterian Meeting House again. I guess he kind of went back and forth. I haven't totally figured this out, but that his service was presided over by Mr. Dinwiddie, and Reverend Muir had died long before in 1820. And there was a funeral procession described by William's daughter, who writes a big diary where I get some of my information from her, although some of it is, you're not quite sure what was true in that, but still I read it anyway. She gets things mixed up, when you write later, you forget what happened first, and anyway. So there was a funeral procession with carriages and people walking to the gravesite at Presbyterian Cemetery at the south end of Alexandria, which we probably all know. And William is buried there. This is his enormous stone, which must have been put there. I'm not sure when that was put there, maybe later by some of his offspring. And it's surrounded, it has its own little, if you go to look, it has its own little fenced in area. You can open the gate, you can go in, and some of his kids and their husbands and daughters and people are all buried there too. And William's first wife, Margaret Bartleman, is not in here because she died earlier. And that's in the book too. But she's buried a little further away. And William's first brother is also Peter, also in the book, is also hard to find, but I found him. And he's also a little further away because Peter died much earlier than William and the rest. So
when William arrived in the early 1800s, were there indigenous peoples, Native Americans, were they long gone?
yeah, I have no talk from William at all about that. We know they were here. We have the spear tip from 13,000 years ago, but so yeah, no, I don't think he ever mentioned them at all. So last week I told you about how I found William by reading the history page in the Alexandria Times newspaper, which I kept it, all my underlining at the time. So this article, it alerted me, it's written by Lance Malamo, who used to head up the OHA, Office of Historic Alexandria, who I interviewed later for my movie that never happened. But after I discovered William, I spent months and months, probably most of a year, just looking for William Gregory descendants. At some point, then I contacted the Presbyterian Meeting House and the cemetery, and the cemetery's superintendent, David Hybe. I got him on the phone. I called him up, and he didn't know me, and now we know each other very well. But David got me over to Don Dahman, who is the historian at the Meeting House. And Don just gave me a slew of information about the Gregorys. So this is why it's better not to do a film about your own family, because who knows who they were. But if you pick someone else, there's a lot of information. It can be a lot easier. So he goes, "Oh, do you know your own family?" I know nothing about my own family. I know all about Williams. So Don gave me just a slew of letters and newsletters and writings from his daughter, Mary Gregory Powell, which are all in the Alexandria Library, if you're interested. So after many months of reading all this, I came upon a Gregory house in the West End. And I'm a pretty good sleuth, so I know how to figure out who owns that. So I managed to contact the owner of that house. And coincidentally, a Gregory descendant, who is now my good contact, had just been visiting a year earlier, just not long ago. And that was Pete. So I left a voicemail for Pete, and he told me later he was sitting at the bar with his colleagues. He got this voice message, and later he called me back, and it was a rather interesting conversation. It's like, "Oh, hi, I'm Ellen, researching your family." And he said, "Oh, yeah, that's fine." He thought that was great. And it turns out Pete had a trove of these family letters in his basement. The whole trove of this is parents, brothers, sisters, 9 brothers and sisters writing about each other. You know how it is. What's Susan doing? Who's so-and-so married? There's a new baby, back and forth, what it's like in America. Well, anyway, this whole trove got kept together and was found in England much later in the 1960s or 70s by a woman named Eileen Bennett. So Eileen just had an avid interest in collecting historic papers. So she found these in an antique shop. And they were sitting there in a basket, just all these letters. And she thought, wow, this looks interesting. I mean, these are old. I've seen some of them. Handwritten, the beautiful handwriting of William and his father. They're gorgeous. They're all folded together, and they would have been sent across the ocean. So they're folded and stamped. They have a little stamp on it. Fascinating. So she finds this trove of letters, and she wants to buy them. And the Scots, the English, the Brits. So this cantankerous old British antique owner guy, and you can't have those. I want to keep those. Oh, come on, let me have them. Well, okay. I'll sell them to you, but only if you tell me what's in them, because I meant to read them. She said, okay, fine. So it took her years and years because there are tons of these letters and I've only seen a small fraction of them. So Eileen goes in the 1960s, 1970s or so there, and she types up, she goes through the letters, she's English, so these are Scots, so she might understand some bits, she might not understand everything, but she types it up as best she can from the handwriting. And what happened then was, where was I? So she embarks on the project to get the letters back to the descendants in America. And she somehow finds Edith Snowden. So we all know Edith Snowden was also, there was a publisher called, I think it was Samuel Snowden here in Alexandria, one of the earliest publishers. And Edith was a relative of Samuel Snowden. And she was also a relative of William Gregory. And William today, this is, I don't know when this was happening exactly, but this is our time. And so my contact, Pete, is the family historian. So she called Pete up and said, we got to get these letters to you. Eileen is in England. So let's see. I've totally lost my place here. I've been going along. Ah, yes, here we are. Okay, Samuel Snowden to America. So I only just found out recently, Pete told me I finally met Pete. I was working with Pete for years, like 7 years on the phone. He was sending me letters, it was back and forth. I didn't know if this would ever happen, if it would be a movie, but anyway, we're in touch for years and years over this. And finally, I just actually met Pete for the first time this last year, and two other of his cousins, who one of them also was involved in the project and gave me some pictures for the book. So we had this great reunion this last summer, last June, it was great. And we met at the Bartleman House at 207 at Sonoma Cellar. We met there and had a really nice dinner all together. And it was just, we had Don Dahman and we had David Hybe, and everybody was just like, we'd all been working on this thing for years. And we had a really wonderful time. Well, so Pete, I only just found out during that trip that Pete told me how getting those letters to America, they didn't just mail them. No, he didn't want Eileen to mail these. So it happened that Pete had a colleague who was going to be going to London. So this grand rendezvous was planned, and Eileen came somewhere in London and handed this trove of letters to this guy. And I guess that was safer than the mail, I guess. So, but he brought them back and gave them to Pete. So that's what I have on that story on the book. So I thought for the end, I would tell you a little bit about my own work. A little break. So for my work, I'm a vendor here in Alexandria, and I've been selling this book at the markets, at outdoor markets, along with items that I make, mostly things that I print or design myself. Went to art school, painting and printmaking, so I know all about the whole history of printmaking. And so I get a chance to talk to people about my book all the time, because it's always there. And it just draws attention, because so many of us are of Scottish descent, many people. So they see that Scottish and they come over, and there's a misunderstanding that basically, oh, Alexandria is a Scottish town. So, and people often comment on that. And I say, well, actually, no, the entire country was settled by Scots, not just Alexandria. We're no more Scottish than any other place. The Scots were everywhere, Scots and the English, the largest and earliest group of migrants from Britain, Scots and English, especially the Scots. The Scots were poor, really poor. And so all of America was settled by Scots. I thought I was going to find waves, like, oh, there'll be a reason they came, like the Culloden, or as I looked, I didn't notice any waves. There was nothing about waves. Scots were basically a constant trickle. I mean, things have always been rough in Scotland. Right now in Scotland, there's about 7 hours of daylight. So right now it gets light at 8:30. My mother-in-law was just telling me it gets light 8:30 in the morning, and it's getting dark at 4. And later, as we get later in the year, it's going to get dark at 3:30. So they're going to have light from like 9 to 3:30. I mean, so that's tough. Things have always been tough. So It's
But in
been a
the
steady.
summer, you get longer time.
You have a 17-hour day in the
Right.
summertime.
Yeah.
And then you have the 6 hours of darkness.
Mhm.
Now you have 6 hours, 7 hours of daylight. So it's just a steady trickle all the way up to my husband. So my husband and his family member, his brothers and sisters, just like William. First, Stuart came, and then Gail came, and then my husband came, and now and then his fourth brother. So it's exactly, nothing's changed. People still migrate the same way, except on an airplane. But
Still can take 11 weeks.
the other thing people love to ask me is, are you Scottish? Well, any Scot like my husband will tell you, as he always does, a resounding no. I am American. After generations of my family living here, all knowledge of our Scottish heritage is gone. And that is the reason why I wrote this book.
Mhm.
So that is the majority of what I have to say. I have a few more comments. We were talking about families, and I was so addled last week, I couldn't even remember the name of my own family that were from Loch Lomond. It was the McFarlanes. So apparently the McFarlanes lived on the islands in Loch Lomond. So that's where Scots would live. They would live in a little island. Some of them were handmade. A cranach was a name for that. But mine lived actually on a real island that are still there today. The islands are there, not the structures, I don't think. What else? Okay. Well, are there any questions, comments?
Ellen,
Yes.
I was wondering about some of the more details about problems that immigrants from Scotland had coming over here. You said a lot of them were penniless.
Absolutely penniless.
Apparently, Gregory maybe was not penniless because he had parents that were fairly well off.
He had probably like $1,000 on him.
Wow.
I don't know how much he had. He had an amount, and it is written down. Maybe it was worth about $1,000 or something. But his father was a so-called merchant, or we call him a businessman. Actually, he was a farmer. Most Scots started out farming. They moved in town, but they were leaders. And I have in the book the actual list of things that William brought with him. Fascinating. The handwritten list. Great coat, a pillow, a mattress. A mattress?
What, a mattress?
Yes, a mattress. So I mean, I guess it meant a mattress must have meant like maybe a roll of
Mhm.
something he
Bedroll.
could lie on. But William came over as I say in the book, often most people came over in steerage, which was the bottom part of the boat, and that's where the rats were, and it was not nice. And you're
Pestilence.
packed in there. Yeah, you got sick. Everybody got sick. It was horrendous. William, on his first trip, later some of his other brothers did come over in steerage, but on William's first trip, this is son number 1 to go. Okay, this was a big deal, and they managed. William got himself and he was on his own, I think, getting this with the help of a family friend in Greenock, where he lived till he got on that ship. And he was able to buy himself a cabin on the main level. And there's a great ship which I visited in Baltimore. You can see that. I took photos of it, but you can see the cabin level. There's a little table in the middle, and then around the edge of the ship sides are these little tiny cabins, and you have your own little room. So William traveled in that. Yeah, it's a beautiful example. Where was I? So how were things here when they got here? I don't know that much about that. I think for a migrant coming anywhere, you're always starting over from zero. You don't know anybody, you're just, so I think it was hard.
As an 18-year-old, can you imagine that? An 18-year-old, I mean, I think Chris, when he was 18 years old, and he was probably one of the more mature kids we had, but to just up and move all by
Yes.
himself.
William suffered. It took a letter to get home 2 months.
Yeah.
So he wrote a letter in January, and if they got it, in March.
We have that problem with the postal service now.
But they talk about it. Every letter starts out with, "Oh, I got your letter from last November." So it was hard. I mean, just a kid, yeah.
Was his intention to get to Alexandria when he first came? You say he went to New York.
He had never, he probably, now, his father had been through Alexandria, but no, he didn't know where he was going. That was a big question of mine. How did this work? You know, what was the motivation? I think his father sent him, now they had 9 children in Kilmarnock at the time. And I think, you know, and William was not interested in the weaving factory. So he didn't want to do that. You know, he's one of those kids that I want to do something different. So I think the father, you know, America beckoned. America was like it was the fad. I mean, it was everywhere. It was in the newspapers. Friends and relatives were going, people were getting letters from America. So it wasn't a secret. I mean, everybody knew, and a lot of people, and ships were starting to go more frequently to come across. Eventually ships would come on a regular schedule, but at that time, the ships went when you had a ship. So William went to Greenock and he had to kind of wait around and live with a friend of his dad's, family friend.
And what about Kilmarnock, Virginia? Was that settled by people from Kilmarnock?
So Kilmarnock, Virginia is a teeny crossroads, and it was settled by a guy who, his mother owned some land in Kilmarnock, but that guy actually lived in Glasgow because Glasgow was nearby. It was just up about 25 miles to the north of Kilmarnock. So the guy who came here to Virginia and settled Kilmarnock here was a Glaswegian, I guess, but he did have a connection, I think his family connection to Kilmarnock. So you can imagine I ran across that. I had to look it up.
How did he survive or do during the Civil War?
So William died. William died in 75. And we have lots of comments about the Civil War. My story ends at about that time. I do include a letter, some last letters about now. So William was a Southern sympathizer. People were horrified when I wrote this. My husband, for example, and my Scottish contact in Kilmarnock, Frank Spence, my ever helpful guy who got me everything out of the museum over there, is great. Anyway, Frank and Andrew were both horrified to find out that William was a slaveholder. Andrew said, "You can't write this book. This is terrible. You know, you have to find a good Scot to write about." I don't know.
They're hard to find.
I mean, the Scots were the slave owners. You know, the Scots were implicated. I mean, the Scots were part of the deal. My family owned, I believe, yes, my family owned one. Franklin Johnson owned at least one slave. So my family were slaveholders and were later in the cotton business. What was the question?
Well, I was just curious how his business was affected, because, you know, Alexandria was taken over by the Union
So,
troops.
yeah, that was a hard time, really hard, as you know. And William's children were off fighting for the Southern side. And the daughters went to go hang around. There was a new train. They took a new train down to hang out with their brother, Douglas. And William wrote letters. Now, William was wealthy. So William was sending money. He was lamenting to his sister Susan back home, his older sister, the first child of the family, Susan. And he writes back and says, you know, "Oh, there's only so much I can do. I'm sending money to the kids." He would send money to his sister, also in the book, who was up in New Jersey. He was helping to support her and her family. And so William was a wealthy guy. And he owned now several properties. So yeah, that was Civil War time was a hard time. I didn't dwell on that. I do describe the troops marching down Washington Street when they first came to Alexandria, the very day 2, I think, of the war. Alexandria got into it, and the troops came down Washington Street. Some of them came in on ships, and huge ships. Actually, it was 3 small ships protected by one large federal ship at the time. But they came right down in front of William's house. And his little daughters at the time described what that was like. The troops coming right by the house, and they were there with their enslaved nanny. They had 2 enslaved nannies watching the Union troops come down Washington Street.
They didn't confiscate anything from him, did they?
No, but they jailed William's son, who was a physician, a doctor, helping the Union troops. He had gone back to Scotland to study medicine in Edinburgh, because you couldn't study medicine in America. William sent his child back to Edinburgh, came back here to US, and was a doctor for the Southern troops, where he was caught by the Union soldiers, and he was paraded back up to Alexandria, and he was walking past his family home. He was going to be jailed at the cotton factory at 515. So that's two blocks up from William's house. His own building that he helped build was a jail, and his own son was jailed there. But William, the son, William Bartleman Gregory, says, "That's my parents' house. Would you let me go home and say hello to my mother?" And they did. They said, okay. So he goes into his family home. It must have been hugs and kisses and tears and God knows. And she takes off his bloody clothing or whatever it was, gives him a new coat, gives him some nice new clothes. And then he gets jailed in the cotton factory. And then this little sister, so there were 2 sets of kids. William was the first group. And there were some young kids from the second wife, Mary Donaldson Long. And those little girls would go over to the cotton factory and peek through the fence. There was a stockade fence around it, right? It was a jail. And she would peek through the fence and yell out for her brother. Incredible stuff. You can see how I just was drawn to this. So let's see if I had any questions for you guys or comments. Hold on. How are we doing? A few more minutes.
Ellen, what is this meant for you?
What is this? What meant for me?
Yeah, for you, this work.
As I said, this has been like the love of my life for, years and years. I just absolutely adored every minute of it. So yeah, it was great. And it pulls you in, I got to find out this. Oh, I got to read more about that. Reading those letters, it took me a year just to go through those letters that Eileen had typed and decipher her typing, which had degraded. I go to Bishopton sometimes and visit my in-laws, and I kind of wanted to know the town. I thought, well, there's a cute little church, like this little old European church, a stone church with a bell with a rope that they ring the bell, and a little cemetery. And I thought, well, this would be interesting to find out about a community. It's good to go to the church. That's where the people go. So I went, and I found out that the church service was the exact same as here. I felt right at home. They have the exact same order of service, everything, no different. Afterwards, they meet in the back, have a tea. It was lovely. Has anybody heard, have you guys heard about the Church of Scotland General Assembly in Scotland? You guys, are you aware of that? Yeah. So this is interesting. The governance, which I don't know much about the governance of the Presbyterian Church, but the Mama Church is in Edinburgh. And it's the General Assembly. It's called the General Assembly, just like our government in Virginia. And it's a beautiful building, and they have a meeting room, looks just like a Congress room. And if you ever go, it's this massive building. It's probably granite. A lot is built in granite. And it's right on the edge of Prince's Gardens, a beautiful central strip, like a big mall of gardens. And it's right on the edge of that. It's up the hill and overlooks. And that's the Presbyterian General Assembly building where they meet every year. So anyway, it's fascinating and beautiful. If you're ever there. Oh, so one more comment, and that's it. That's my last thing. We're out of time. Someone asked about the money. I looked it up. I actually asked my husband. He reminded money in Britain was changed in 1970s. So my husband remembers when the switchover happened. Let's see now. Pounds. So back then, before 1971, the changeover was called decimal day in 1971. But before that, so my in-laws, my husband, they had pounds sterling, pounds, shillings, and pence. Pounds, I think, were divisible by 12, decimal day, changed it all over to everything is now divided by 10.
It was, I was there, I think, under the old system, I know Roger.
So was I.
Yeah, but it was.
I'm a Sasnak.
Oh,
It was, 20 shillings to a
that's
pound.
not.
Yeah, 20 shillings
And
for
you
a
had
pound.
21 shillings.
12
Use the
pence
issue.
to the shilling.
Yes.
And we had farthings then as well.
Yeah.
Quarter
Oh,
of a
yes, you
penny.
took it out of my mouth. There I had it. 20
So a
shillings.
farthing is a fourth penny.
And
Ah,
the
is
halfpenny
it?
is pronounced halfpence.
A penny is half a penny.
Halfpence.
Interesting.
Then you had threepence, sixpence.
Yes.
Right,
And,
And what's the other one?
a shilling.
My father-in-law told me this one.
A farthing,
could
a
have a-
halfpenny, a penny, a threepenny, a sixpenny, and a shilling.
Well,
and
what
then
about-
you could have a half crown and a crown.
Yeah.
Oh,
And a half crown was 2.5 shillings.
well, what about, have you heard of a tuppence?
Yes,
Yeah.
tuppence is,
And if you-
there's no such coin, but
It was-
tuppence was 2 pence.
Yes, tuppence, or,
And to confuse the issue, if you had 21 shillings, that was not a pound, that was called a guinea.
oh, interesting.
So if you shopped at expensive shops, they would advertise
Yeah.
their clothes in guineas.
Oh.
And I think horses were always purchased in guineas.
We know.
That's
And
right.
threepence, have you heard of a threepence?
And there was a florin.
Oh, that's right. And they
Florin,
almost
2
called
shillings.
they almost called the EU, European euro.
Oh, really?
There was a debate, they were gonna call it the florin.
Yes, right,
But the euro won out.
yeah,
over florin.
right.
That's all from me. That's all I got.
Ellen, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So we're off for a couple of weeks, a Christmas break, and we reconvene on Sunday, January 7th, and we'll welcome the Reverend Dr. Alice Bellis, who is Professor of Hebrew Bible at Howard University School of Divinity. So have a blessed Christmas, everybody. Go downstairs and enjoy the